thing they would do is hold up a mirror and make you look at it honestly, without flinching, without making excuses for what you see. Most people don't want that. They come looking for direction, for a shortcut, for someone to tell them what to do next. And the mentor smiles because they've seen that before. That eagerness to skip past the hard part and get straight to the doing. But the doing without the seeing is how people stay stuck for years, moving fast in the wrong direction. Here's what the mirror shows you. It shows you where you are right now, not where you imagine yourself to be. Those two things are often very different. And until you close the gap between the story you tell about yourself and the reality you're actually living, all the plans in the world are built on sand. The mentor would ask you some uncomfortable questions, not to embarrass you, but because they care enough about your future to be honest about your present. Questions like, how disciplined are you really? Not on a good week when you're motivated, but on an average Tuesday when nothing is exciting and nobody's watching. That's where your actual character lives. They'd ask you about your habits. Not what you intend to do, but what you actually do. Because intention without follow-through is just noise. And the difference between where you are and where you want to be is almost always found right there, in that space between what you said you would do and what you actually did. They'd point out the patterns. Most of us have them. We start strong and trail off. We respond well to short-term pressure, but lose momentum when the urgency fades. We're great at making promises and inconsistent at keeping them. A mentor sees this not as a character flaw to shame you with, but as raw material to work with. The pattern isn't your destiny. It's just your current operating system, and operating systems can be changed. Here's something worth sitting with. You can't navigate well from a false starting point. If you think you're further along than you are, every map you draw is going to be wrong. And you'll spend time and energy trying to figure out why the path isn't working, never realizing that you've been misreading your own location from the beginning. The honest self-assessment isn't meant to discourage you, it's meant to orient you. Think about it like this. If you're lost in a city and you stop to ask for directions, the first thing any good directions require is knowing where you are right now. Not where you wish you were, not where you were 6 months ago, right now. The mentor gives you that. They give you an accurate pin on the map of your own life. And that requires courage on your part. It requires you to sit down and take stock without the usual defenses, without blaming the economy or your upbringing or the people who didn't help you when they should have. Some of those things may be true, but they're not useful in this moment. What's useful is what's in your control, what's in your hands right now, today. A mentor would also point something out that most people miss. They'd say that the reason honest self-assessment feels so uncomfortable is that we've tied our identity too tightly to our current level of performance. If I'm not doing well, that must mean I'm not a good person. If I haven't achieved what I thought I would by now, that must mean something is fundamentally wrong with me. But that's not how it works. Your current results are not a verdict on your worth. They're just data. And data is incredibly useful. Data tells you what's working and what isn't. Data tells you where your effort is landing and where it's being wasted. Data points you toward adjustments, but only if you're willing to read it clearly, which means you have to stop protecting your ego long enough to actually see it. The mentor would tell you this. The bravest thing you can do is be honest with yourself when nobody else is watching. Not dramatic honesty where you tear yourself down. Just clean, quiet honesty. Here's what I've been doing. Here's what it's produced. Here's the gap. Here's where I go from here. That's it. That's the whole thing. That honest look in the mirror is not the end of the process. It's the beginning. And it's the most important beginning you can have, because everything that comes after it is built on something real. Everything in life has a price. Not always money, though sometimes money is part of it, but always a price of some kind. Time, discomfort, discipline, sacrifice, focus, delayed gratification. The life you say you want comes with a specific bill attached to it, and a good mentor makes sure you understand what that bill actually says before you commit to paying it. Most people make the mistake of wanting the result without fully accepting the cost. They want the business, but not the years of uncertainty that come before it succeeds. They want the strong relationship, but not the daily effort of showing up fully for another person. They want the body, the skill, the knowledge, but they want them to arrive conveniently, without too much interference with the rest of their life. And that's why so many people start things they don't finish. They didn't read the fine print. A mentor sits you down and tells you, pick what you want and then look at the real cost of it with clear eyes. Not the cost you hope it will be. Not the cost someone described in a book where everything worked out neatly. The actual realistic cost. The number of hours, the number of failed attempts, the number of mornings where you have to get up and do it again even though the last round didn't go the way you planned. Here's a truth that takes some getting used to. There is no discount version of a worthwhile life. The universe doesn't offer markdowns on the things that matter. You can find smarter paths, more efficient routes, better systems, but you cannot eliminate the cost. You can only decide whether you're willing to pay it. The mentor would want you to get specific about what you actually want. Not vague wishes, not "I want to be successful" or "I want to be happy." Those aren't answers, they're placeholders. What specifically do you want your life to look like? What does a good day look like for you, in concrete terms? What kind of work are you doing? Who are you spending time with? What have you built? Once you can see it clearly, you can start to work backwards and understand what building it actually requires. Then the mentor would say something that might surprise you. They'd say that wanting the life isn't enough. You have to want the work that produces the life. Because the work comes first, every single time, and it comes whether you feel like it or not. And people who are only in love with the destination tend to quit somewhere in the middle, when the work is hard and the destination is still far away. But here's the good news in that, and there is good news. When you find work that aligns with what you genuinely value, not what someone told you to value, but what actually matters to you, the cost doesn't disappear, but it changes in character. It becomes something you're willing to pay. Not easy, but worth it. That's the distinction. Not easy versus hard. Worth it versus not worth it. The mentor would caution you about one thing in particular. They'd warn you about the trap of comparing your cost to someone else's. You look at someone who has what you want and you think, it didn't seem that hard for them. Maybe they had better circumstances, more talent, more luck. And maybe some of that is true. But you weren't there for the years before the easy part. You didn't see the failed attempts they don't talk about at dinner. The cost was paid. You just didn't see the transaction. Comparison is dangerous because it can make you feel cheated. It can make you feel like you're paying more than you should have to. Like the system is unfair to you specifically. And when you feel cheated, you start looking for shortcuts, ways to get the result without paying the full cost. And the shortcuts more often than not either don't work or take you somewhere you didn't want to go. A mentor would tell you to be honest with yourself about what you're not willing to pay. This is important. There's no shame in deciding that a particular life isn't worth its particular cost to you. Some people decide that the cost of building a certain kind of business, for example, means giving up time with their family, and they decide that's not a trade they're willing to make. That's not failure. That's clarity. That's knowing what actually matters to you and organizing your life around it. What is a problem is wanting something badly and then quietly refusing to pay for it, and then wondering why you never have it. That's the form of self-deception that a mentor helps you break out of. They help you get honest about whether you're actually committed or just interested. Because committed people pay the cost. Interested people wait for a discount that never comes. Decide what you want. Look at the real cost. Then make a clear decision, yes or no. and live by it. That's what a mentor helps you do. That's the whole framework. And once you can do that honestly, you'll waste a lot less of your life in the gray zone of wanting something, but not actually pursuing it. A mentor watches two things at once. They watch your progress toward the goal, the milestones, the results, the numbers, but they also watch something else, something that most people don't watch at all. They watch who you're becoming in the process. And they'll tell you plainly, the person you turn into along the way is more important than anything you end up with. This is a hard thing to hear when you're focused on an outcome. When you have a target in front of you, it's natural to measure everything by whether you're getting closer to it. That's how progress feels. That's how you know you're moving. But the mentor pulls back the lens a little and says, yes, but look at yourself while you're moving. Are you growing or just grinding? Are you developing or just executing? Are you becoming someone you respect? The goal itself is almost never the final word on whether a journey was worth it. You've probably met people who achieved what they set out to achieve and weren't satisfied because they expected the thing to fill a space that only a certain kind of growth can fill. And you've probably also met people who didn't quite reach the goal and still feel like the whole thing was deeply worthwhile because of who they became in the attempt. A mentor helps you understand that the work you do on the outside has to be matched by work you do on the inside. Not in a vague, mystical way, in a practical way. The discipline you build while pursuing something hard is a resource you carry with you forever. The patience you develop when things don't go on schedule is a skill that will serve you long after this particular goal is finished. The resilience that comes from being knocked back and choosing to keep going, that's character and character compounds. Here's what the mentor would say about character. They'd say it's the most durable thing you own. Skills can become obsolete. Industries change. Circumstances shift. But the character you've developed, the quality of your word, the depth of your commitment, your capacity to handle difficulty without becoming bitter, that travels with you everywhere and never loses its value. They'd probably point out something you might not expect. They'd say that who you're becoming affects not just your long-term success, but your day-to-day experience. When you're growing as a person, when you can feel yourself becoming more capable, more patient, more grounded, the work is energized by that feeling. It has a different texture. It's not just effort spent, it's investment made. And the return on that investment shows up in how you carry yourself, how you handle hard days, how you treat the people around you. The mentor would warn you about a particular kind of drift. It's possible to spend years working hard and end up harder in all the wrong ways. Bitter instead of seasoned, cynical instead of wise, impatient with people, short with yourself, dismissive of anything that doesn't produce immediate results. That's what happens when someone chases the goal without tending to the person doing the chasing. They'd tell you, pay attention to how you're treating people when the pressure is on, not just when things are going well, but when things are tight, when you're tired, when you're frustrated. That's when character reveals itself. That's when you find out what kind of person you're actually building. And if you don't like what you see in those moments, that's the most important project you have in front of you. A mentor helps you understand the relationship between what you're working toward and what you're actually made of. Sometimes the goal changes as you grow. What seemed like the right target at 28 turns out to be too small by 35. Not because you're greedy, but because you've developed and your vision has expanded with you. That's good. That's healthy. But it only happens if you're actually growing along the way, not just checking boxes. There's a question the mentor would come back to regularly. They'd ask you, are you proud of how you're showing up? Not the results yet, just the showing up. Are you being the kind of person who keeps their word to themselves? Who does the work even when no one's watching? Who treats setbacks as information rather than evidence that the whole thing is pointless? Those are the measures that matter most in the middle of a long journey. And finally, the mentor would say this, The greatest thing about working towards something meaningful is not the arrival, it's the transformation. The version of you that finishes the journey is not the same version that started it. And the difference between those two people is the most valuable thing the whole process produced. Don't be so focused on the destination that you miss what's happening to you on the road. I'm telling you, there is a moment in almost every person's life, usually somewhere in the middle years, when things become acceptable. Not great, not what you originally dreamed of, but acceptable. The bills are paid, the job is stable, the routine is manageable, things are fine. And fine, the mentor would tell you, is one of the most dangerous places a person can live. Because fine doesn't feel dangerous. That's exactly the problem. Danger usually announces itself, a crisis, a failure, a moment of obvious breakdown. But fine is quiet. Fine sneaks up on you slowly. Fine is comfortable enough that you stop pushing, stop questioning, stop reaching. And before long, fine becomes permanent. Not because you chose it, but because you stopped choosing anything at all. The mentor would have a word for this. They'd call it the plateau. And they'd tell you that the plateau is not a resting place. It's a trap. It looks like stability. It feels like you've earned a break. But what's actually happening is that your ambition is quietly cooling, and your tolerance for the ordinary is quietly rising. And those two things together are a ceiling on your life. Here's what's tricky about comfort. It's not inherently wrong. Rest is necessary. There are seasons of consolidation, of letting things settle, of recovering your energy. That's not what we're talking about. What we're talking about is the slow acceptance of a smaller life than the one you were built for. The quiet agreement you make with yourself that this is probably as far as you're going to go. A mentor would tell you to watch for the signs of the plateau. One of the clearest signs is that you've stopped being uncomfortable. You're not really stretching anymore. The work doesn't challenge you the way it used to. You're operating mostly on habit and experience, rarely on edge, rarely unsure of yourself. And while confidence is valuable, the absence of any uncertainty often means the absence of any real growth. Another sign is that you've stopped caring much about what you're learning. Early in the journey, you're hungry. You read, you ask questions, you seek out people who know more than you. But on the plateau, that hunger fades. You think you know enough. You've seen this before. You're not as curious as you used to be. And when curiosity dies, growth follows it out the door. The mentor would push back on the story you might tell yourself about why the plateau is okay. The story usually sounds something like this. I've worked hard. I've earned this. I'm not 25 anymore. This is just what life looks like at this stage. And there's just enough truth in that story to make it convincing. Yes, you've worked hard. Yes, you deserve rest. Yes, life does look different at different stages. But none of that means you've reached the ceiling. It just means your current habits have produced a ceiling, and habits can be changed. Here's the distinction that matters. There's a difference between being content and being settled. Contentment is a good thing. It's peace. It's gratitude. It's appreciating what you have while you work toward what's next. Being settled is different. Settled means you've stopped moving, stopped wanting, stopped engaging with the full potential of your life. One is healthy. The other is a slow surrender. And most people can't tell them apart from the inside. The mentor would be direct about this. They'd say, the world will let you be mediocre if you want it to. It will not resist you. Nobody is going to show up at your door and tell you that you're settling, that you're capable of more, that the version of you that stopped pushing is not the full version of you. Life mostly accepts whatever you give it, which means the decision to keep growing has to come entirely from inside you, without external pressure, without a deadline, without a crisis forcing your hand. If you had a mentor, they'd probably tell you something worth holding on to. The antidote to the plateau is not some dramatic overhaul of your life. Most of the time, it's something smaller and more consistent, raising your standard for what you expect of yourself by just a little in the right areas. asking more of yourself in your craft, setting a target that makes you slightly uncomfortable, spending time around people who are still moving, still growing, still excited about what's possible. Those things shift the environment, and the environment shapes you more than you realize. The plateau is not a verdict on who you are. It's a signal. It's the moment life is tapping you on the shoulder and saying, "There's more here if you want it." The question is whether you still have the appetite for it. Life sends signals constantly. It's been sending them your whole life. The question is whether you're listening, and more specifically, whether you've learned to hear the right things in the noise of everything that's happening around you. A good mentor teaches you this more than almost anything else. Not just how to work harder, but how to pay better attention. Most people move through their days in a kind of forward momentum, busy, responding, managing, reacting. And in that state, it's very easy to miss what life is actually trying to tell you. The signal gets buried under the noise of the immediate. And then years pass and you find yourself looking back at a moment where life was clearly pointing somewhere, and you didn't notice, or you noticed but didn't act on it. A mentor would start here, with the failures. Because failure is one of the clearest signals life sends, and it's also one of the most routinely misread. When something doesn't work, the instinct for a lot of people is to assign blame, shake it off, or push harder on the exact same approach. What the mentor teaches you to do instead is pause and ask what the failure is showing you. Is it showing you a flaw in the strategy? A gap in your preparation? A misalignment between what you said you wanted and what you're actually willing to do? Failure is not punishment. It's information. But only if you read it carefully. They'd talk about friction. Friction is the resistance you feel when something isn't working the way it should. Not the normal difficulty of hard work, but a specific kind of recurring resistance that keeps showing up around the same things. When you notice that, a mentor would tell you not to dismiss it or overpower it. Sit with it first. Ask why it keeps appearing. Sometimes friction is telling you that you're on the wrong path. Sometimes it's telling you that you're on the right path, but handling it the wrong way. Either way, the friction is data, and it deserves your attention. The mentor would teach you to notice the people who keep showing up in your life and why. Not in a superstitious way, in a practical one. The people you encounter, the conversations that happen to land at the right moment, the introductions that lead somewhere unexpected. Most people write these off as coincidence. But the mentor would suggest that you've been unconsciously positioning yourself for those encounters through the way you're living, the things you're working on, the questions you're asking. Pay attention to what those connections are pointing toward. There's something the mentor would say about doors that close. A lot of people experience a closed door as rejection, as evidence that they're not good enough or not lucky enough. But the mentor would reframe it. They'd say that a door that closes firmly and repeatedly is not rejecting you. It's redirecting you. Life tends to be pretty clear about what isn't meant for you if you're willing to listen. The problem is that most people keep knocking on the same door out of stubbornness or fear of starting over, when the whole time there was an open door just a little further down the hall. They'd also help you understand the difference between the discomfort of growth and the discomfort of misalignment. Both feel uncomfortable, but they feel different in quality. The discomfort of growth is hard but energized. You're stretched, you're unsure, but you feel like you're moving towards something. The discomfort of misalignment is draining and hollow. You're working hard, but something feels off at a deeper level, like you're building in the wrong direction. The mentor teaches you to feel that difference, because ignoring the second kind of discomfort for too long is how people end up deeply invested in a life that doesn't actually fit them. Here's what the mentor would say about listening to yourself. Not to your fears. Those are loud enough on their own and rarely useful. Not to your mood, which changes daily, but to the deeper, quieter layer underneath all of that. The part of you that has a pretty clear sense of what matters, what's working, and what you've been avoiding. Most people know more about their situation than they're willing to admit, And the reason they don't act on what they know is that acting would require change, and change is uncomfortable, and staying in the same story is easier. A mentor helps you build the habit of honest internal listening, not as a spiritual practice, though some people frame it that way, but as a practical one, taking time regularly to ask yourself how things are actually going, not surface going, deeply going. Are you on track? Are you spending your time in ways that align with what you value? Are there things you keep putting off that you know need your attention? Those questions don't require a crisis to be useful. You can ask them in a quiet hour on a Tuesday and get more clarity from them than from a year of busyness that never slows down long enough to reflect. And finally, the mentor would say this: learning to hear what life is telling you is a skill. And like any skill, it gets better with practice and worse with neglect. The more you develop the habit of paying attention to your results, to your patterns, to your instincts, to the signals in your environment, the more clearly you're able to see what's happening and what needs to happen next. You don't need to have all the answers. You just need to stay honest, stay curious, and stay willing to hear what life is trying to tell you, even when the message is inconvenient. That's what a good mentor gives you. Not a map, not a guarantee, but better eyes. And better eyes change everything.